Welcome everyone to today's webinar on winning SOPs. On behalf of the Women's Industry Network, I would like to introduce today's presenter. David Luehr is the founder of Elite Body Shop Solutions and the author of The Secrets of America's Greatest Body Shops. Dave has a big presence in the auto body industry and a passion for helping you improve your business and quality of life. Thank you so much for being here today, David.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Wynn. I love you gals, and I'm happy to be here. I've got I got some great content for you today, guys. You want to learn about some SOPs. This is a subject that I'm passionate about. I don't know how many people are actually passionate about SOPs, but for some reason I am. And I think after today's presentation, you'll understand why. Because it creates so many wonderful opportunities for businesses to grow, to improve culture, and build the businesses of their dreams. So I like to start off this topic by asking this simple question. Do you own your business, or does it own you? Have you ever thought about that? I recently met with such a person that had just turned 72 years old. This fella had not taken a vacation with his wife in 8 years. Here's a man, let's call him Carl, okay? It could just as easily be Susan or Marilyn, but this is Carl, whose dreams of a distant retirement seemed more and more unattainable with each passing day. Carl's business was a mess, and his personal life was no different. Sadly, even though he had capable employees, he felt he couldn't even leave his shop for any length of time without things completely falling apart. Poor Carl was operating an owner-driven business, or more accurately, he was a business-driven owner. You see how that works? Do you guys ever feel like that? Or do you know somebody in a business that does? This is real common in our industry right now, and it is a major source of giving shops the inability to grow, to retire if they want. And so I know that we all have feelings like this sometimes. And my hopes today are that we can help set you free, or someone you know, and maybe help set them free, right? I would encourage you guys to sometime visit my website, elitebodyshopsolutions.com, and there's a couple of great articles that we recently posted on the blog about SOPs. So that should help you a little bit. So here's some of the things that you're going to learn today. You're going to learn what makes the difference between a good SOP and a bad one. I'm going to show you some root problem analysis using the 5 Why method. I'm going to share some examples of what good SOPs should look like. I'm going to show you our handy little 4-step SOP creation process, and how to use standards to improve your culture, and finally, how to get your team on board with the new SOPs that you guys are going to create. So I've been in this business quite a while. I've owned my own shop. I was considered an operational lean and theory constraints expert. I founded my company, Elite Body Shop Solutions, in 2014. Went on with Stacy Phillips to write a book. Hopefully some of you have read it, called The Secrets of America's Greatest Body Shops. We launched that in 2017. Then in 2018, we launched our Elite Body Shop Academy, which is an online resource for education specifically targeted towards independent and franchise-owned collision repair shops. Then we launched Elite Body Shop Events in 2019, which brings seminars live. Haven't done much of those lately for some reason, but we hope to get back to those soon enough. And I have had the amazing opportunity to present, give keynote speeches literally all over the world. I feel so blessed right now. I rediscovered my passion for being an entrepreneur when I discovered that so many small businesses needed help with processes and leadership. So my company and I have a deep-seated belief that anyone who is willing to work hard on the right things can be a limitless entrepreneur. That's what we call it, limitless. And it is the human potential to create great businesses that inspires me to get my lazy butt out of bed each and every day. That's what inspires me. So my first job in the body shop industry came when I was only 15 years old. It was at a place in Salem, Oregon called Superior Auto Body. And although I didn't know the difference at the time, there was very little structure in this business. There was no SOPs. I think the most structure I saw was the head painter, a guy named Chris. You know, he was organized because in one drawer he had his marijuana, in another one he had his Jack Daniels, and the other drawer was his pills. You know, that's just how things were back in those days, right? But my second job really taught me a lot. My second job, excuse me, was at a company called Mako, right? And I started out as a masker there and went on to become a head painter and painted hundreds, if not thousands of cars for these guys. But it was there that I really learned the value of documented processes. You know, thanks to Anthony Martino, the founder of AMCO and Mako, finally SOPs were brought into the collision industry. It had never been seen before those times. So I really learned a lot through those experiences that carried on through the rest of my life. And then of course, years later, fate would find me working for an MSO in Tennessee that was purchased by Abra. And I learned a lot more during this experience about how a company can leverage SOPs to support rapid growth, right? So I got to ask the question, is it possible to be too process driven? Are you like me where I've gone through a drive-in at McDonald's and they didn't smile? They just handed the bag of with the hamburger and the fries in it out the window, and I left feeling like I've just been processed. So yeah, I believe that there is such a thing as being too process driven, right? I like to tell the story of my favorite restaurant, which is J. Alexander's. And I know it's a smaller regional company, but they have impressed me so much because they've been able to combine great processes. See, for example, if I go to J. Alexander's and they say, Mr. Luehr, it's going to be a 20-minute wait, it's always a 20-minute wait or less. How do they do that? Right? But they make me feel important. They make me feel good because they have mastered customer-centric processes. Some places are so process driven that you feel a little dirty when you come out of the place. You don't feel like you've really been appreciated. So what I'm going to teach you today is how to create processes that are more customer focused, right? I'm going to teach you about how to remove unnecessary waste from your system. I'm going to challenge necessary waste or what you think is necessary. I'm going to show you how to solve root problems, not just symptoms, but root problems, which are really going to simplify your efforts on creating good SOPs that are simple to understand and to train. I'm going to show you a little bit about including the ability to audit and test. If you want a great SOP, you've got to be able to audit it and test it, right? I'm going to show you a little bit about visual standards. These are oftentimes the best type of SOPs to have. And then I'm going to show you how you've got to capture 90% of the incidents and manage the exceptions. This is going to massively reduce the length of your SOPs. If you're trying to create a manual, I'm going to show you how to make it from a 300-page manual down to maybe 50, okay? So let's start at the beginning. Good SOPs must add value to the customer. And the problem that I'm seeing with some businesses, and especially some of the larger ones these days, especially as in the collision space, is they don't seem to be clear on who the actual customer is, right? So I'm starting to see the emergence of some smaller and some medium-sized regional businesses that are truly customer focused, and they seem to be growing. And more so than some of those that are solely, like, let's say, shareholder focused, for example. It's really important to remember who the customer is and then build your SOPs around that. So earlier I mentioned J. Alexander's. They're process oriented, yes, but they have developed what I like to call customer centric processes. This is absolutely essential for you guys. The challenge for some body shops is when you build focus only towards maintaining KPIs, towards shareholder profitability, or towards enhancing a direct repair relationship, sometimes it's rewarding the wrong behaviors. It may not always translate to the actual customer. So again, I'm not saying you shouldn't be on DRPs. I'm not saying anything remotely close to that. I'm saying just be careful when you're building processes and building KPIs around those processes, that it's rewarding the right things, and that's your customer. Master process builders can create profit through the primary focus on the customer. So what else? How about removing unnecessary waste from your system? Why is it that people often follow procedures that are designed to solve a problem that either no longer exists, or if the root problem was solved, it wouldn't exist? So I once worked for a tyrant that had pages and pages of procedures on how to go about collecting aging accounts receivable. Seems fairly important on the surface, doesn't it? Until you consider there were literally no procedures in place to avoid having the accounts receivable in the first place. See, you got to think a little bit more upstream when you're creating good SOPs. This is another reason that SOP manuals are 10,000 pages long, to address problems that either rarely exist or that shouldn't exist in the first place. In the world of lean thinking, and I know there's some lean thinking people out there. I saw DCR Systems, I saw AXO join in this call today. So I know you guys understand this philosophy. So in the world of lean thinking, there are three kinds of activities that take place. There are value added activities. These are the things that the customer is willing to pay for. In the body shop world, that's usually when a technician is physically touching a car. That is the epitome of lean. Okay, then we have waste, but we've got two different kinds of waste. We've got essential non-value added activities. So this would be like perhaps writing an estimate. Does a customer pay you to write the estimate? Probably not. So it's considered essential waste, right? Another thing might be the time that you spend updating your customers, right? That's something that you got to do, but are you getting paid to do that? Not necessarily. So that's called essential non-value added activities, right? And then the third kind, the kind that you really want to avoid, is those non-essential activities. This is pure waste in the world of lean. This is like paint redos, taking excessive cigarette breaks, missing damage on your repair plan. These are things that we must avoid at all costs, is the unnecessary waste. So when you go through your processes, say, how do we get rid of these things? Because we're tired of it. So the next thing is also waste, right? But what are some of the things that you think are necessary compared to that are actually necessary? Sometimes it's really about challenging our old belief systems, isn't it? Once you've eradicated your system of the non-essential waste, it's time to turn your focus on your beliefs and get real about what you consider necessary. You ever heard the story of Grandma's ham? I'll tell you the story. I know some of you have heard it before. A young wife wanted to make a special dinner for her husband on their first anniversary and chose a favorite family recipe, ham. She went to the store and bought all the ingredients for their meal, came home and called her mother for instructions. Since she had never made it herself, she had to call her mother. The first step that her mother gave her was to cut off the ends of the ham and throw them away. The young woman was confused and asked why. "I don't know," said her mother. "That's the way my mother's always made it. So I have always followed her instructions." The young woman was curious and decided to call her grandmother to find out why that was the first step in the family recipe. Why, sweetie? I always had to cut off the ends of the ham so that it would fit into the pan. So the moral, of course, is that are you still cutting the ends off of your ham when it comes to process creation, or are you willing to challenge some of your old beliefs, right? Just because it's something you've been doing a long time does not mean it's necessary, right? So let's get real about what is and what isn't necessary so that you can eliminate a lot of clutter in your processes. So another important thing here is the next topic is you want to create direct solutions that attack problems at the root. So if you're creating an SOP, you want to get away from creating them only to attack symptoms, right? Like earlier, I mentioned the guy that was creating solutions to get rid of an AR problem, when the real problem was how to avoid the AR in the first place, right? So I'm gonna, in just a minute, I'm gonna discuss our 4-step method for helping get to the root. So too many businesses rely on SOP manuals that are ridiculously laden with convoluted procedures, meticulously constructed to deal with symptomatic problems that shouldn't exist if earlier dealt with in an appropriate, thoughtful manner. Kind of like the sentence I just read, containing lots of fancy filler words designed to impress the listener, but serves little real value. See how that works? All right, I'm just trying to have a little fun here, folks. So I'm going to give you an example of what we call 5 why root cause analysis. So whenever you're faced with a problem, all right, quite often it's what we call a symptomatic problem. It's something that if we attacked it at the root would no longer exist. The problem, as I mentioned earlier, is most shops spend time running around the shop with their hair on fire, always trying to deal with all these symptoms, when if they would just turn their focus to the root problems, all these other problems would cascade away like magic. So I'm going to give you an example of that. So let's go back to the accounts receivable problem. So the problem is the AR is too high. So then you ask the question, why? Well, because insurers are slow paying the supplements. Okay, well, why is that? Well, poor documentation from the shop. Well, why is that? Well, the estimators don't have time to keep up with the paperwork. Well, why is that? They're too busy dealing with missed damage. Well, why is that? See, now we're getting to the root. By the time you get to the 5th why, if not earlier, you've solved the root problem, which is poor repair planning. It's amazing in this industry how often we try to attack symptomatic problems when all we've got to do is figure out how to get repair planning done right. The other problem that I see, and there's 3 root problems that cause almost all of the collision repair industry's headaches, okay? First is poor repair planning. Number 2 is WIP management. In other words, having the right number of vehicles on the property, right? Because if you've got twice as many cars, all your systems are going to fail. And the third one is how you manage the parts, specifically when it comes to mirror matching. So let's get real. Let's solve root problems. Let's go upstream and find out what they are and solve them up there, shall we? So another component of a good SOP is they are simple to understand and simple to train. And we want these things to be at a 5th grade level. We want them so that anybody can understand them. Even a guy like Bob Gallant has got to be able to understand these things. So I have a kind of a rule of thumb. We need to be able to explain the process in 30 seconds or less and have full clarity and understanding from the listener. Don't assume ever that the staff understands the company standards. So I challenge any of you to go into nearly any body shop in North America and ask the owner if her staff knows what's truly expected of their people. And she will always say yes. But then You go out into the shop and ask the techs, they won't have a clue, right? So the trick is to build simplicity into your processes and standards, then to over communicate it, right? Yes, until you're blue in the face, over communicate it, right? And then another thing I'm going to cover here in just a second that's really important to make sure that people do get it is testing, right? So let's take a look at testing. So this is a simple test that I put together. My company does create playbooks on occasion for people and simple SOPs. This is, guys, this is something you guys can do yourself. If I can create an operations playbook test, so can you, right? It doesn't have to be anything complicated, but it really proves that they understand the material that you're trying to train them on, right? So don't just take this to chance. I learned this lesson very well from the short time that I worked at Abra back in 2012. These guys were the masters at training, testing, and auditing. They took this stuff very, very seriously. In fact, I'll never forget when the #2 guy at Abra came out to Murfreesboro, Tennessee to audit one of my stores. It was frightening, but it really drove home the point how serious they are about making sure that people understand and follow the processes. So this is another little tool that we build, custom build for some of our clients. This is an operations playbook auditing tool. And this is kind of an old version of it. They're a little more modern looking than this now, but this tool ties right into and works alongside our elite playbook. So it's a great way to measure and improve through accountability, right? You'll notice that we provide department by department specific responsibilities, and then how the auditor can measure the performance versus what is now a known standard. You see, coaching, what coaching really is, it's your ability to provide feedback to help your team resolve the deficiency in the gap between the current performance of the individual and the company standards. Does that make sense? I'm going to say it again. So when you coach, what you're really doing is you're helping provide feedback so that employees can fill the gap between their current level of performance and what the company standard is or what's expected of them. Now, doesn't this make accountability a lot easier? All right, so one of my favorite lean things to really geek out on is, and we used to spend hours and hours doing this stuff, and it doesn't have to be anything extremely complicated, but visual standards. You could put posters, photographs, you can put them right, images in your operational playbook, wherever you want. Visual standards work very, very well. So it's clear, if you look on the left, that if that's what we expect, then we don't expect you to do the thing on the right. Pretty straightforward, isn't it? All right, let's look at another example here. All right, you're either in the line or you're out of the line. Really not a lot of room for argument here, is there? So you guys starting to understand how known standards really help with easing the pain of accountability conversations? Because it's not just Mary being a jerk any longer to this guy because she's opinionated. It's clear now that the car is either in the line or it's out of the line. The welder is either in the space or it's out of the space. So it's a lot easier to have these accountability conversations. Let's look at another example. Parts cart standards. Right? This is where we put this is where we put the bumper cover. This is where the middle shelves. This is where we put the R&I parts, or what we call the good parts. The bottom shelf is where we put the damaged parts. Obviously I've seen a couple different variations of this, but this is very good. It's at this particular shop that I visited, they had one of these attached to every one of their parts carts. And this was a store that does $2.5 million a month. So they've got a lot of parts cards. Everything is in its place. It's clear. It's a beautiful thing to watch. How about this shop? Is there any question where these cars are supposed to be parked? You know, when you walk outside this shop, you will see the area clearly marked where the vehicles are staged to come in for engineering and disassembly, right? Once a vehicle's been engineered and disassembled, it goes to another area awaiting for all the critical parts to be on hand. So visual management is a great thing to incorporate into your SOPs because it's really easy for everybody to understand. Let's look at another thing here. Okay, so the last of the 8 good SOP factors is this. Do not try to write an SOP manual that covers 100% of every possible problem that could ever happen. That is why some people's SOP manuals are 10,000 pages long, right? So just attempt to capture 90%. If you can capture 90%, you will go from 10,000 pages down to about 50. Exaggerating a little bit, maybe, but you get the point, right? For employees, it's actually a little bit insulting when you get too detailed. Give them a wee bit of wiggle room to put their own creative touches within the parameters that you create with your standards and your processes. Does that make sense? So people prefer to have a little bit of influence on how things are done. So be sure to include them in the process of building your SOPs. And I'll touch on that again in just a minute. So let's look at some other examples. I know you guys love this stuff. So back in the old days, this is how we do it. We used to stay up all night long and do what we called a value stream mapping exercise. We would have like the entire office papered with Post-it notes. And on each Post-it note would be another event. Like this is where we ordered the parts. This is where we received the parts. This is where we returned the wrong parts, and on and on and on. And then we would go through this value stream mapping exercise where we would actually determine what is value added and what is waste. And if it was waste, we would seek to eliminate it from our process. So this is just an old example of how we used to do that. And we could determine, do I recommend you guys doing this? I don't know. It's an awful lot of work, and I've already kind of done the work for you. But you know, you can see here in this example that we were able to determine that of the entire 20.3 hour repair job going through a shop, only 32.36 hours of that was actual work, where 43.57 hours of that was waste. All right, so your job as master SOP creators is to eliminate the waste. You know, your goal, I think my friend Rich Altieri probably has the best description I've ever heard on what lean is. He says, when people are touching cars, that's lean. If they're not touching cars, that's waste. That's all you need to know about lean. So it's your job is to create processes in the body shop or in any business that you might be in, even if you're creating processes for win, right? What are the value added activities and what are wasteful? Get rid of the waste. So here's another thing that you can do. Flow charts are a great way to show processes. Now this is more of a decision-making tree more than like a detailed standard work instruction sheet. So this would be like an accompaniment to a playbook, but these are quite handy just to remind people on what steps to take next. And I've used quite a few of these over the years. This is one, this example is for blueprinting a car, decision-making tree. All right, here's an example of one of the, this is a sample of what we do at Elite, just to kind of give you some context of how simple this really is. And because I used to be that guy that wrote 300-page SOP manuals, this is like, what, 49 pages that goes from keys to keys. I don't care which direction the toilet paper roll goes on the hanger. My wife does, but I don't care in the context of building an SOP manual. I want to cover from keys to keys, from the time the customer drops off the vehicle at the repair center to the time they pick it up and we finalize the paperwork. That's what we're trying to capture here. And this is what we call the workflow part of the document. I want it to flow from, from step to step. So you see initial customer contact, how to prepare an estimate, how to schedule, how to create the RO folder, whether or not to pre-order parts. So it follows the process. And then once it comes into the shop, then it follows the process from body to paint and so on. Now, this example, I do not really get into the technical components, right? I don't get into those type of SOPs because most of that work's already been done. You guys at the paint companies do a fantastic job with creating, SOPs for how to paint a car or how to prep a car. The OEM, the manufacturers, I know we got Honda. Honda has terrific processes. They're called OEM repair methods, and shops must use these for the technical components of the repair job. So at Elite, we don't really get into the technical side that much. We don't need to. We're trying to build a framework so that the technical stuff that you bring to the table can be done consistently, repeatedly. So here's just another view of that, what that would look like. Customer comes into the repair center. Here's this is what we call a standard work instruction sheet. So it's just, if you've got a subject that needs to be expanded on a little bit, we put another document towards the back of the playbook that will help further give instructions on that. So if you remember back in the beginning part of the admin workflow, it just says create folder. Now, if you need more information on how to create the folder, if you forgot, or if you're training somebody, go back to the SWIs, that's the standard work instruction sheets, and then this will tell you what items need to be placed into that folder. It's just another example here. We also include what we call critical to quality items. Critical to quality are the most essential tasks that must be followed. And these are the ones that we hold people accountable on. These are the ones that we put in the test. These are the ones that we put in our auditing system. These are the ones we want to make sure get done every single time, or we will have a process failure. All right. So I used to create job descriptions. I don't do that anymore. It's not that I have anything against job descriptions. But what I want to understand is, what are the step-by-step procedures or processes or tasks that we must go through in different segments of the repair job? We've got initial sales and service, estimating, scheduling, and each one of these has a task attached to it. Whose job is it to greet the customer? Well, I want to put somebody's name in there, either a name or a title. It could say estimator, it could say CSR, or it could say Bob. And then you want to put a secondary person in there who is going to be your backup. So if the primary person isn't able to do that, I need to make sure I've got somebody trained and ready to step in. So this is just kind of my twist on how I create, and instead of doing a job description, I want to plug names in here. And this is actually a really interesting conversation. If you've ever sat down with a business and gone through this and said, whose job is it to do this? And everybody kind of looks at each other going, I don't know. I thought that was your job. So if nothing else, have the conversation. It's priceless. All right, earlier I mentioned standard work instruction sheets. So just to be clear, that's what an SWI is. It's an old acronym from, I think, back in like the World War II days. And so when you have something that, so this is my repair planning process. Used to be a 90-page SOP for repair planning. I used to tell them which direction to walk around the car, which panel to look at first and next, which seatbelt to check first. And that information, again, it comes in handy for training, but what you really need to remind people on the right critical steps is just 10 steps. The one on the left, this is what I expect my disassembly tech to do. If you do these 10 things on every job, you will be successful. And same thing for the repair planner or the damage analyst or the blueprinter or whatever fancy name you want to give them. If you do these 10 things on every single vehicle, you will be successful. And what we have found after study is that when there is an in-process failure, which usually manifests in reassembly, it can almost always be pointed back to one of these 10 steps being skipped, right? So I recommend that you actually document. Now, again, I'm talking to some people here that deal with body shops, but maybe you want to create some SOPs for your own business that isn't a body shop. It's the same premise, right? Let's go back and have some accountability conversations on which steps were skipped. There's a lot of different areas of your business that you can really simplify and make these visual. A lot of my clients actually blow these up into posters and they hang them out in the shop wall. There's no excuse for forgetting one of the 10 steps because they're always there, they're always visible. This is what we call the 4-step SOP creation procedure. So before I ever think about creating some fancy process, I want to really try to figure out what is the problem that we're trying to solve here. Do I really need to write a procedure because the guys are not cleaning them up after themselves and they're leaving all their dirty dishes in the sink? This is seriously the type of questions I get. How can I get my guys to quit using cell phones all the time out on the shop floor? Should I write an SOP for that? No, you've got cultural problems. So the point is that we need to really get clear on what the problem is that we're trying to solve and then figure out how to attack it, like I mentioned earlier, at the root. Now, all of you should have been given access to this as either a handout or an email or something. I believe Emily made it available to you guys on the call. So I would encourage you to print this out. And as you're going through the process of building SOPs or individual procedures, think through this a little bit. So step 1 is ask the problem. What are we trying to solve? Step 2 is perform the 5 why exercise, like we did earlier with the AR problem. We understood that this shop is having an accounts receivable problem because they're not repair planning correctly, right? I mean, they seem like completely different opposite things. So you go through that, and then you figure out in step number 4, what are the critical to quality steps that will solve the problem? So again, back to the AR issue. The AR issue in this particular case was a symptom of bad repair planning. So the critical to quality steps for repair planning were those 10-step sheets that I showed you. You see how that works? So figure out the most crucial elements and figure out what those are. And those are the things that we really want to get hyper focused on. As I mentioned earlier, most of the symptomatic problems are solved by 3 root causes: WIP, repair planning, parts management. Let's focus there. All right, in different kind of business, it's going to be something different, but there's always root problems. All right, we're getting close to the end here, and we are going to take some questions. So hopefully Emily will assist me with that here in a few minutes. But this is one of the things that I've really learned about leadership. You know, people say, well, what's more important, leadership or processes? And to me, they go a little bit hand in hand, because leadership becomes a lot easier when people know what their job is. I tell the story about a close friend of mine that I worked with back here in Middle Tennessee. Her name was Brandy. And Brandy was one of the hardest working gals that I ever worked with. And she went through the transition when we became Abra. And I spoke to Brandy about a year after I left Abra, and with the hopes that she would say, yeah, things at Abra are horrible. But she didn't say that. She said, you know what, Dave, I like it. I like it better now that we're Abra. I said, you're kidding me. Why? She says, because I always know every day what's expected of me. I had really underestimated how much people crave knowing what they're supposed to be doing and being held accountable. Right? So the consolidators, their ability to get ordinary people doing extraordinary things are through the dedication that they have to their processes and holding people accountable to those. If independent shops could be armed with the same stuff, imagine what they could do. Imagine what you guys could do. And you guys can do this, right? Have you ever read a book called Crucial Accountability? This is a great book. There's a reason that I picked these books and recommend them, because this thing changed my life. It really got me thinking differently about how coaches explain the gap between the current level of performance and a known standard. So for you to be successful with this, you've got to have a known standard first, don't you? All right, getting the team on board. These are some recommendations. This is some recommendations, and then we're going to wrap this thing up and put a nice tidy bow on it. If you want to have your new SOP manual be acknowledged and people to actually do the stuff, you've got to involve the team in the creation of that process in some way, okay? You've got to give them a voice. You've got to follow up regularly on the process. If you have a new process that you've implemented and you don't go out and check on it every day, multiple times a day, it's going to come unwound, folks. I guarantee it. It's going to come unwound. And you go out into the shop or into your office and you ask two simple questions: what's working and what's not working, right? What's working and what's not working. And then you help them solve the problems on what's not working. Another way to do that is through continuous improvement meetings. I recommend on a new implementation that you do it with the entire staff, and you do it multiple times a month. You know, and at the very least once a month with the entire team. You have an opportunity for everybody to be heard. You go around the room, and from my experience, the first couple times you have a continuous improvement meeting, some people aren't going to speak up because they don't know if they can trust you enough to speak freely yet. So give it some time. Keep asking them. Keep drawing it out of people, because people really do want to have a voice. And then when people are not doing things up to standard, you've got to be willing to hold them accountable. If you're walking through the shop and you see a bunch of dirty parts on the leather seat of a Lexus, you got to say something, man. If you don't, they're not going to take you seriously, and they're not going to take your implementation serious. They're going to think, oh, this is just another flavor of the month. If I just bite my lip for another 30 days, this nightmare will go away, because it always does. You got to be consistent, right? And when you have wins, right? So if you're incorporating a new repair planning process and you have a car that goes all the way through the system without any failures, man, it's time to bust out the champagne. well, maybe not the champagne, but you at least need to celebrate that win. Be very vocal, very open about it, so everybody knows that, guys, we've put a lot of hard work into this new implementation, this new SOP, and it's working, guys. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Celebrate those wins, because people support what they help create. That is one that I want you guys, I'm begging you guys to write that down. People support what they help create. So if you go out and create an SOP manual and attempt to shove it down everybody's throat, you're going to get what you've always got. Emily, do we have any questions?
Yes, thank you so much for all that, David. So our first question is, besides displaying the SOPs as a giant poster, what are other ways of distributing and displaying them, especially if that's electronically?
Now, what do you mean electronically? Just so I'm clear.
Sure, I will give her a moment to answer that, but I believe I'm thinking like a digital distribution, so maybe there's an app or a training program.
Emailing an SOP or by other electronic means. So that's always one of the challenges of, especially nowadays when everybody's working remote, is getting everybody on the same page. I honestly think a great way to do this, if we cannot for some reason be in the room with people while we're trying to onboard a new process, is get on a Zoom call, get on GoToMeeting, and talk through it. I think all of us think we're better communicators than we really are. At least my wife tells me that. So, you know, be a little bit careful at just sending out like an email and saying, this is what we're doing from now on, unless it's just something that's super, super simple.
Excellent. And then in terms of if there's something that they want displayed like on a shop floor, you know, is that on a big touch screen? Is this maybe not a good way to do SOPs? I mean, I know you talked about them being visual.
No, there's a lot of great tools that can be used out in the shop electronically. There's production boards, right? That's not necessarily an SOP, but it's a great communication tool, right? And if people know what's expected of them, so for example, if you have a production board and a car is moved from here to here, the SOP is that they got to go get another car. So yeah, so it does kind of tie in, and as I mentioned earlier, I'm a huge fan of anything visual. Whether you have an electronic board, like Carbeat, for example, that's a great example of a tool that can be used to help keep everybody on the same page out in the shop. For some shops, it could simply be having designated parking areas so that when a car is in a certain spot, that has a certain meaning to it. You know, so it's really about staging the vehicles. And so, yeah, there's endless ways to do that.
Absolutely. Let's see. Cheryl wants to know, what SOP have you implemented that was the most life-changing for you?
For me or for them?
I think probably both.
There is you know how you do something your whole life and you think you got it perfected, and then some guy comes along and says, have you tried this? And you're like, boom, duh, right? I did. I had one of those huge aha moments, and it came from a person that's actually a very good friend of mine named Ron Kewen. And Ron and I were talking about repair planning, and he came to one of my shops, and we ran through an exercise where he did this verification process where we are setting up a staging table to put the damaged or the R&I parts on, and acknowledging them on our estimate prior to them being placed on the parts cart. And I know this sounds like I'm just geeking out over nothing. This has really made some dramatic differences in the accuracy of the repair plan. It's what the Japanese call a poka-yoke device. It's almost impossible to screw up when and when you take the human nature to make mistakes. I used to get so tired of people saying, well, what do you expect from me, Dave? I'm only human, right? So what you got to do is you got to acknowledge that people are human, and you've got to put systems in place, such as this verification process, that help us capture the mistakes before it's too late. That was my big one.
Okay, so I don't see any more coming in, so we'll do last quick call on questions.
Yep.
Dave,
I encourage everybody to reach out to me if they think of some questions later on. You know, there's my email, david.luehr@elitebodyshopsolutions.com. Also invite you to, you know, come check out the website. There's a lot of good articles on SOPs and a lot of other leadership and more production oriented content as well. I'd love to have you come and visit. So I'm gonna stop sharing my screen here and go live. In my, did you notice I was wearing a hat today? I was all worried about, you know, showing up wearing a hat, and I tried to do my hair for you guys, but it's just out of control, man. I haven't had my hair cut since February. Will you forgive me?
we forgive you, Dave. Yes. Only because what you provided was so valuable.
Good. Well, I hope you guys got a lot out of the content today. And like I said, I'm fairly passionate about something that others may see as very boring, but this really is a game changer for businesses. You don't want to be Carl. You know, I don't want to see, you know, my friends turn 72 with no exit strategy, no way to go take a vacation. And this is a great way to do it. You know, another final note here when we talk about books, if you haven't read it yet, read The E-Myth by Michael Gerber. And that really goes into a lot of the concepts about the importance of building a turnkey business, a business that you build as if you were going to sell it or franchise it, even though maybe you don't plan on selling it or franchising it. You want it to always be that turnkey, less business owner driven and more process driven. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, David. Thank you to everyone tuning in, and we will see you the next time. Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.